In the past few years, certain events have come to light that suggest perhaps our own government has not always been honest and forthcoming with us about certain government projects. Some have gone so far as to suggest that many of these strange events are part of a planned and ongoing conspiracy. Have American officials actually approved medical experiments on prisoners without their knowledge? Have there been secret experiments affecting whole populations? Did the Navy actually attempt to make a World War II ship invisible? Is it possible that the experiment actually worked and that the ship suddenly reappeared moments later in another naval yard hundreds of miles away? And not only hundreds of miles away, but years into the future. If there was such an experiment, did the crew know about it, or were they used as unwitting guinea pigs? Has the government used individual citizens, groups, even whole cities as test subjects without telling them what was going on? Have researchers usurped the work of some of our greatest scientists in order to conduct secret studies on time travel, interdimensional transit, and mind control without the participants' knowledge?
Albert Einstein did complete the work on the unified field theory. He and other mathematicians did complete the equations which gave us the field for invisibility.
After decades of secrecy, is it possible that the truth about American citizens being used as scientific guinea pigs is finally coming out?
We all go through life accepting what textbooks told us about the universe. But what happens when questions are raised about many of our fundamental beliefs? A mystery that cannot be explained. An enigma that defies reason. A surprising and unexpected answer. To encounter such a mystery firsthand may change your life forever. Face to face with the greatest riddles of the ages, the world's most profound mysteries reach out and touch your life in ways you've never imagined possible. Encounters with the unexplained.
For years, rumors of bizarre secret government experiments have surfaced, filtering into the public media from strange and unlikely sources. For example, Nazi doctors on trial at Nuremberg following World War II sought to justify their actions by pointing to an experiment conducted in Chicago prisons in which 400 prisoners were infected with malaria in order to study the effects of new and experimental drugs. Whether or not the prisoners were told what was happening to them is still open to question. But this was hardly the beginning of such reports. One of the most disturbing experiments was allegedly undertaken in 1931, when a single pathologist, Dr. Cornelius Rhodes of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Investigations, according to reports, knowingly infected his human subjects with cancer.
Dr. Rhodes's attitude towards his subjects is apparent in a letter used as the basis for a criminal investigation into his actions.
What we need is not public health work, but a tidal wave or something to totally exterminate the population.
The criminal case was dismissed, however, by the prosecutor appointed by the North American governor of Puerto Rico. His reason was that Rhodes was merely mentally ill or a person of few scruples.
Dr. Rhodes went on to direct the establishment of U.S. Army chemical warfare laboratories in Maryland, Utah, and the Panama Canal Zone.
This doctor, who was described as mentally ill, was subsequently awarded the Legion of Merit and appointed to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission.
Atomic energy, of course, gave the entire world something new and terribly frightening to think about, and the people at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, a 560-square-mile manufacturing plant in southeastern Washington, apparently thought their friends and neighbors in the Great Northwest wouldn't mind being used as test subjects.
One of the largest intentional releases of radiation in history took place at Hanford in 1949. Known as the Green Run, it was purposely kept from the public for nearly 40 years. Later, documents released by the Department of Energy showed that Hanford had secretly released 8,000 curies of radioactive iodine. Allegedly, the radiation was released to monitor the radioactive plume stretching across Oregon and Washington. This was done in order to evaluate equipment used for detecting Soviet plutonium plants. No one living downwind from Hanford was ever warned or evacuated, and the Green Run was only one release. To give you some idea of what was going on at Hanford, the 3 Mile Island accident vented between 15 and 24 curies of radioactive iodine. Between 1944 and 1947, Hanford emitted an estimated 685,000 curies of radiation into the environment. That is a staggering amount.
To bring the point a little closer to home, there have been reports recently of contrails, trails of gaseous substances left in the wake of jet planes flying high above certain areas of the country.
A mysterious sickness seems to be centered around these contrails left by KC-135s and KC-10 aerial tankers that were supposedly seeding clouds. Officially, the Air Force denies it is involved in anything associated with these sightings, but in a recent article, Tommy Farmer, former engineering technician with Raytheon Missile Systems, says he has collected samples of what he calls angel hair, sprayed by the mystery aircraft on 6 occasions since February of 1998.
No one knows where the planes are coming from or where they land when they're finished. However, some reports indicate the phenomenon is weather modification related. And the Air Force has said the military can find ways to own the weather by the year 2025. So what it comes down to is, all of this is supposed to be for our own good, or for the sake of national security, whether we like it or not. But if that's the case, why aren't we being told about it? It's not as if we're at war. But then maybe even that wouldn't make a difference. Even with World War II raging and the obvious need for secrecy, one of the most bizarre government experiments of all time took place right here, at the Philadelphia Naval Station, and the results still shock and mystify those who were part of it. The story actually begins in January of 1956. A man by the name of Morris K. Jessup, a former university mathematics and astronomy instructor with a keen interest in Einstein's unified field theory, received the first of 2 letters from a man who signed himself Carlos Miguel Allende, or Carl Allen. In these rambling, sometimes almost incoherent letters, Allen warned Jessup to forget his interest in the unified field theory, stating that the U.S. Navy had already tried it on a destroyer-type ship in 1943.
The result was, and stands today as proof, that the unified field theory to a certain extent is correct. The result was complete invisibility of a ship and all of its crew.
Jessup assumed the letter came to him in response to a book he had published in 1955 called The Case for the UFO. The book had become the hot topic of the cocktail circuit in Washington, D.C., and an annotated copy even found its way to the Office of Naval Research, where the notations in the margins and above and below the text drew the attention of 2 ONR officers. The officers claimed that their interest was purely personal and had nothing to do with naval research. Still, they called Jessup in to evaluate the notations. Jessup received another letter from Allende within just a few days of the first. He opened his mail and read,
I wish to mention that somehow, also, the experimental ship disappeared from its Philadelphia dock and only a very few minutes later appeared at its other dock in the Norfolk-Portsmouth area. This was distinctly and clearly identified as being that place, but the ship then again disappeared and went back to the Philadelphia dock in only a very few minutes.
That assertion must have been a jolt to Jessup, since the 2 naval stations are some 400 miles apart. It would take days, not minutes, to get a destroyer-type vessel from one berth to the other and back. The letters seemed alternately desperate and angry, occasionally even pleading, and inexplicably, Jessup turned the letters over to the 2 naval officers who had the annotated copy of his book. He was sure, he told them, that at least some of the notations were Allende's. Whether or not Jessup ever made any further inquiries is unknown. His